continue conceptualizing and mixing media. Please join me in welcoming Michelle.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. In 1987, Oliver Stone released his classic film Wall Street, starring Michael Douglas as the notoriously ruthless corporate raider Gordon Gekko, and Charlie Sheen as Bud Fox, the young, wide-eyed stockbroker with dreams of hitting the big time. The film tells the story of Bud Fox's drive to be a successful man of the 1980s. When he gets involved with Gordon Gekko, his life is transformed, and he climbs the corporate ladder, gaining more wealth and power, while losing his morals and ethics. Set in 1980s Manhattan, it's a time of decadence and excess, of high society and high finance, both on-screen and in real life. Over on the actual Wall Street, the money was flowing. President Reagan had lifted many financial regulations that made possible more than 25,000 mergers and takeovers during the 1980s. This would require a huge workforce of college-educated, energetic, and cutthroat accountants, attorneys, and brokers. Oliver Stone's character, Bud Fox, is one of those new members of the workforce. Fresh out of college and eager to make it, Bud Fox is a go-getter. Bud Fox is a yuppie. In 1984, Newsweek declared it the year of the yuppie, or young urban professional. This new social class had buying power and spent with ease. A cultural shift was beginning as these new young urban professionals began to take their place in the big cities. Obsessed with object status and taste, the 1980s yuppie was the personification of a certain social class. They spent on the latest technologies, designer furnitures, and expensive fashion, and would be responsible for the art boom of the 1980s, as their purchasing power would shake up the market. Typically born during the late 1960s and considered part of the tail end of the baby boom generation, the yuppie has been portrayed as greedy, self-righteous, and materialistic. The Yuppie Handbook defines a yuppie as a person of either sex who lives on aspirations of glory, prestige, recognition, social status, power, money, or any of those put together. It also has a list of things a yuppie would never do, like eat or drink anything instant, read a tabloid, cancel an hour of reserved court time, and of course, the most important, never give up. Depictions of yuppies could be found everywhere during the 1980s and early 1990s. Sitcoms like Family Ties had Alex P. Keaton, the lovable yuppie, a capitalist in training rebelling against his radical liberal parents. Or novels like American Psycho, which unleashed the ultimate consumer yuppie, homicidal protagonist Patrick Bateman. Bud Fox portrays the classic Wall Street yuppie. He's interested in gaining capital. He wants to be a part of this new upper social class. He's looking to invest in his future, and there are plenty of opportunities for him to do so if he just had a little more cash. Bud Fox comes from a blue-collar background. Here he meets with his father, Carl, played by Martin Sheen. The kid has come to ask his dad for money. Carl Fox questions his son's spending habits, to which Bud responds with a laundry list of expenses for his lifestyle. He states, $50K does not get you to first base in the Big Apple. Not anymore. Look, I got 40% in taxes, 15 grand for rent, I got school loans, car loans, food, park my car, that's $3 a month. I need good suits, that's $400 a pop. Carl looks at his son in complete disbelief and suggests Bud move back home and live rent-free. Looking at his father, the young stockbroker says, look, I gotta live in Manhattan to be a player. There's no nobility in poverty anymore. So that's what it comes down to for young Bud Fox. There's no nobility in poverty. Bud belongs to a new generation. He drank the Kool-Aid, as it were. He was born into a time when consumerism was quickly becoming the norm. It was beyond the post-war boom. Yuppies grew up watching the sleek and crafty advertising perfected by the Mad Men generation of the 1960s. This ad from Sony is from 1962. Notice the tagline, "Hold the future in your hands." These new yuppies were a group that was totally receptive to spending lots of money on projecting a certain persona. But what it really comes down to is how much capital you have. So what is capital? Pierre Bourdieu's essay, The Forms of Capital, published in 1986, examines exactly what capital is, and he breaks that into three forms: economic, culture, and social, or cash, education, and status. In his writings, he explains that capital is a surplus, first noting that economic capital is not only money, but can also be property. As we see here, Bud Fox doesn't have very much economic capital, living in his tiny studio apartment. Cultural capital can be thought of as one's education. It is the investment you make in order to learn something. For example, when you travel or go to a museum, you learn about the place that you're visiting or the artwork that you're looking at. Here we see Bud is learning about this, excuse me. Here we see Bud Fox learning about this artwork. Social capital is very much tied to one's social network, and it's exactly what it sounds like, who your friends are and what they think of you. Here's Bud at a party, gaining a little social capital. All these forms of capital are very important to the Yuppie. As an upper social class, they invested in forms of capital in order to project these personas, and also an ideology or system of beliefs. Gordon Gekko, the notorious Yuppie who uttered the infamous phrase, "greed is good," will seduce Bud with his capital investment in a fabulous lifestyle. Bud Fox is obsessed with Gordon Gekko. Gekko has the capital Bud wants, and this young stockbroker knows that if he's going to be a player, he's going to have to get in the game. Upon their first meeting, which took much persistence on Bud's part, he reveals some inside investment information in order to get a closer relationship to Gekko. This works, and Gekko takes him under his wing. We see Bud begin to become a success and follow the path to the perfect Yuppie life, investing in capital. In fact, capital is almost like another character in the film. It can be seen in the background details throughout the movie in the form of large pieces of art. Here, Bud has just walked into Gekko's office for the first time. He immediately scans the room, and we get a quick glance of the various works. Gekko's office is filled with expensive artwork. In this image, we see that Gekko owns a work from Miro and Picasso, as well as some pretty high-end technology. When Bud goes to visit Gordon on business, he is invited into a party where he makes his social connections, using his capital with Gordon to gain new relationships with other players. Gordon has more art at home, and Bud is introduced to Darian, Gordon's interior decorator, played by Daryl Hannah. Bud mentions that he will soon be purchasing a new home and could use her help. This scene shows Gordon and Darian at an art auction. This is pretty typical Wall Street Yuppie behavior. The art boom of the 1980s would be a result of this increase in cash flow between the young professionals. Collectors sought out the next new trends and created art stars. However, many of these new collectors had little to no background knowledge of art. Yuppies began to view the purchase of art to that of real estate, more of an investment than as an aesthetic choice. It became a competition of taste and style. Gilbert Edelson of the Art Dealers Association said of this new group of investors, they buy art to celebrate their arrival. This purchasing power would be more evident as the sales at the two major auction houses in New York, Christie's and Sotheby's, sold over $1 billion in 1987 and accounted for a third of the world's art transactions. However, in this competitive social scene, what the Yuppies spent on most was the concept of capital and projecting an identity. It was never about the image on the canvas, but the canvas itself. The ownership of the object was far more important. Here we see Bud getting owned by Gekko on the racquetball court, Gekko adding a little capital to his social status. So Bud's hard work has paid off. He has invested in capital in order to get himself a home. Here we see he purchases this Upper East Side apartment for $950,000. And of course it must be decorated. Starting with this plywood wall, it's a clean slate, an empty canvas waiting to be transformed. As the montage plays out, we see its brick-like pattern is made from paper that is unrolled and stapled to the wall, not very stable. Then it's covered and painted and meant to look as if it had been there all along. This can be read as a clear metaphor for Bud Fox himself, as he attempts to take his place in the Yuppie social scene. Bud has nothing to do with the decorative choices that are being made in his home. Darian has been hired to make these decisions for him. She acts as the social and cultural capital Bud needs in order to project that he has good taste. After the decorating is finished, Darian leads him around the apartment and asks him what he thinks. He is clearly not a fan, but that doesn't matter. Bud is investing in his cultural capital. His owning of this artwork displays to those who visit his home that he knows about the artwork. Whether he knows anything about the work or even likes it doesn't matter. What matters is the object itself and that he owns it. With his new home and his new girlfriend, Bud has become a player in Manhattan. Riding high on Wall Street, nothing to stop him from living his dreams. Here we see him celebrating with his automatic sushi rice ball maker. Of course, like they say, what goes up must come down. In this scene, Bud has just learned Gecko is planning to destroy the airline Bud's father has been a mechanic at for over 20 years. In disbelief and feeling betrayed, Gordon says to the kid, essentially explaining the facts of yuppie life. Money itself isn't lost or made. It's simply transferred from one perception to another, like magic. This painting here, bought it 10 years ago for $60,000. I could sell it today for $600. The illusion has become real, and the more real it becomes, the more desperate they want it. Capitalism at its finest. This realization was a crushing blow for the young stockbroker. He knew he was taking a risk, but it didn't matter. He has left Gecko's office and wanders Wall Street in a daze. In losing this deal with Gecko, he's lost everything. He spent so much of his time investing in a relationship, in a persona, only to realize that the whole thing was just as unstable as the stock market. In October of 1987, a little over a month before this movie was released, the real-life stock market took a huge crash. Life imitating art, as they say. Real-life Bud Foxes discovered they'd played hard and lost. There was a public backlash towards Wall Street, and in particular the Yuppie. This was a pretty common slogan to see. Of course, the story of the Yuppie does not end with the crash. In 2010, Oliver Stone released Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, a commentary on our current economic situation. Gecko has been in jail for decades and now back out on the streets, looking to build his economic capital. This time, Gecko's protege is his own son-in-law. It's a similar story, and the young go-getter is taken for a ride by the greedy, money-hungry Yuppie. And of course, the backlash still continues, and has gone global. This photo is from a ranch in Australia. It was taken just a few years ago. And so, why do we mock the Yuppie? The 1980s Yuppie social class was a constructed idea dependent on how much capital one was willing to invest in one's future. Their investment in objects was an investment in an ideology of status. The rapidity of their rise and fall, their success and failure, is watching the American dream unfold and then explode right before our eyes. The Yuppie is the missing link between post-war America and global liberal capitalism. He is chimeric, both conservative and liberal at the same time, unstable and dangerous. He is the most primitive of the 1% tip of the capitalist sphere. Thank you.